think the key message here is that people are looking at these new innovations and seeing Uber or Airbnb or any of the other platforms as a threat to their existing business, and looking at just the way that the business works. But what they should be looking at is the consumer shift, as we've mentioned a couple of times, and why people are actually opting for a different kind of experience. And that also goes to people who are being hosts, people who are being drivers. There is a reason why they're actually opting for these new kinds of systems, otherwise there wouldn't be a business. So the entire system that is being offered through these technology platforms has been optimised for the Facebook age, which a large number of people are now preferring to experience the world like that. So for me, there's an element of personalisation that comes along with these collaborative economy platforms where people feel like they have an individual experience each and every time. They're connecting with a real person, and that real person is connecting back with them because they have opted into that same kind of culture, same kind of experience. There's the automation and obviously the seamlessness of these experiences, which you really can't go past. And it's great to hear, John, that the taxi industry is certainly investing in more of the technology side of things, because it's absolutely critical. Because the idea that you get into any particular taxi and the ability to know who your taxi driver is or find who that person was in retrospect, none of these things is possible for the average consumer. Whereas on a platform like Lyft in San Francisco, or of course Uber in Sydney or here, the entire journey is mountain tracked, and you have that personal security to know who your driver was at any given time. And I think all of those things, and what that immediacy is what people are looking for when they are embarking on these experiences. And everybody on both sides is generally more positive because of the system that they're operating within as well. Julien?
So I guess that I'm a strong believer in competition. I believe that competition provokes betterness within business itself, and that's what TripAdvisor is all about. It's about people being open-minded and sharing their thoughts and ideas on product, and then the product having to respond in due course. And usually that response comes in improvement. So with that in mind, I guess the traditional companies have one major leg up on many companies, and that is brand recognition and longevity. And they should use that to their advantage. Some of the regulations and legislations can be promoted. Some of the accolades can be promoted, industry awards and so forth. They're all there to be used as promotion in comparison to these startups that don't have any of these things. And that's fair competition. I believe that as fair as it is for these newcomers to come on board and to try their luck, it's also fair for established brands to promote their branding as such. How they can adapt and adopt. I think that in each sector there might be conflicts, but thereafter they can use different sectors to take advantage of. So for example, in regards to the taxi companies, Airbnb is obviously going to bring more tourists to any given area, and thereafter give your taxi drivers and your established company more work. And vice versa, really, if you're a traditional hotel, you may have the opportunity to rent out your car spaces or include shared car spaces for shared car companies, and so forth. There are ways of incorporating and adopting so that they can work in conjunction with each other.
Mike, what is Oaks doing? Are you taking advantage of this new economy?
Well, can I say, I had some great responses there, because it is about consumer shift. And we have to stay in touch with consumer shifts. We have to have the right people, we have to have the right training, we have to have the right customer service, we have to have the product, and we have to have the performance. And if we have those three ingredients, we will stay competitive. So bring on competition, allow the incubation of innovation and creativity, because it is the next generation. And if we can't stay competitive by having the best people, the best product, and the best performance, we will slowly die. And the consumer will determine that. I saw a quote from the CEO. I'm not pumping up the tyres, but it is Airbnb, right? Jesse. and he basically said, and I thought it was a beautiful quote, now it is jesting. He said, why are we being so successful and why is Uber so successful? It's because we're fulfilling a need that wasn't being fulfilled before, because the technology wasn't there. I don't believe it's just the technology. I believe that's the instrument. Right? I believe that there is a younger generation that actually does Airbnb every weekend. My daughter does it every night. Okay, she doesn't come home, she goes to a friend's place, she sleeps here, she sleeps there. It's just a variation on the theme. So, in short, we've got to look at ourselves, not try and stop the competition.
Sam, what is Airbnb coming up against in terms against the traditional operators? Like, what are you trying to match there?
Well, I think it does come down to, well, actually, I was going to start it off with a quote from CEO Brian Chesky. He said, look, I think that there's a couple of things here, and one of the things, and this is somewhat going back to the previous question, I'll bring that into this is, Airbnb is only 6 years old as a company. In the first 4 years, well, it took 4 years for Airbnb to have over 1 million guests stay on Airbnb. In the last 2 years, there have been over 20 million folks that have stayed on Airbnb. So that gives you an understanding in terms of how people have started to embrace the opportunity. And what is the number one thing that we hear from guests relative to their experience on Airbnb? 89% of everyone that stays on Airbnb say they want to have the chance to live like a local, to experience the local culture, to be part of the local community, and to contribute. And when they do that, they're spending more money and staying in those local communities longer than what they would if they were staying in a hotel because of those experiences they're having. So if I come to the what is the opportunity for traditional operators, I think it's just understanding that there is sort of this movement around people wanting to do things a little bit differently, a little bit the way that they used to. I remember as a kid, the greengrocers would pull up out the front of the house and ring a bell, and Mum would go out there and get the fruit and vegetables for the week. I'm forever trying to explain to my wife the fact that she has to drive 30 minutes to the local farmers market, that's less, that's more of an issue for the environment and the community than it is if she just shopped at the local supermarket. But she's sticking to it. So I think that we are seeing things change sort of in that way, and people want to have those interactions. And so we've spent the last 100 years trying to create things where people have less interaction. And I think one of the things that we're discovering at Airbnb is about people having a more personal interaction. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to see the host when you're renting your home or renting a room, but it does mean that they're interacting and telling you that this is a great coffee shop, this is where you should go for dessert, all of these other things, or if you want to take a run, here's a great jogging path. So I think they're the things that are really, really different.
John, do you see any opportunities for black and white cabs in this economy?
Look, there's no doubt it's making us do things better. I'm not anti-competitive. We live in a very competitive environment, even though it's a duopoly in Brisbane, pure taxi scene. But it is making us think about the service that we deliver. And as good as what we might think it is, we need to meet the community's expectations on service. So from our point of view, from the Queensland taxi industry, everyone's striving to do better. And the message that I've been sending out to our people is, yes, we've got an interloper on this side here who come in without any respect for legislation. But over here, we've still got our customers, we've got our brand, as Julien said before. That point's going to stay with you for a while, that you can promote our name and our brand, because we do have incumbency, and that's terrifically important. I mean, we transport in our country 20 million passengers a year. That's just like the taxi industry has got in Queensland 80 million customers. We need to make sure that next year we've got 81 million, 82 million. We need, whether they're coming in from the outside, coming in to stay at Airbnb property or wherever, we need to get their service. So
way they've built the community, and that is either the host community, the guest community, the driver community, the passenger community. These people are absolutely evangelical about the services without getting paid to do so, and I think each existing company has a huge opportunity to rethink how they're working with their own communities and actually start to think of their drivers as a community or think of the passengers as a community. I caught a cab from the airport last night as well, and the driver, it wasn't like a white cab, but he had driven for both and said that he had no loyalty to either. And I see that as a massive opportunity in terms of how, and not to direct it at John obviously, but this opportunity to have loyalty of the people who are providing the service for you, because in this collaborative economy, the product that Airbnb is offering, for example, they are also with Airbnb's customers at the same time, and Airbnb has to absolutely do right by both of those sides of the equation, whereas traditional businesses have employees who do what they're told, and then they have the customers who they're trying to appeal to. In this new day and age of the collaborative economy, you have to appeal to both, and that's a really important point.
Trevor, do you see that maybe with all the new issues that are popping up and all the new operators, people are tending to see it as, them versus us and not seeing the opportunities that are there in the middle?
I think there's enormous tension between the traditional sectors of the industry and the sharing economy, new entrants in the sharing economy. I'm on various cities in New South Wales, and you can cut the air with a knife at some meetings and forums that I've been participating in, which is quite sad. Might I just suggest that you have a look at one very interesting case study to see the impact of the sharing economy and the impact of the internet, and that's travel agency. For 25 years in Australia, we've had the Uniform Travel Agency Regulation Scheme. Every state had a Travel Agents Act. Travel agents, businesses, qualifications, skills, use of their money was regulated to the finest detail. The most restrictive, draconian regulatory scheme I have seen anywhere in relation to travel agency. For 25 years, that's how they operated. Setting your turnover had to go to a travel compensation fund, and that was how they thought they achieved consumer protection, quality of service, or whatever. Along came the internet and OTAs, online travel agents, and within a few years, they found a couple of things. It was impossible to regulate. Impossible to regulate an online travel agent based in some other country with a server here and a customer there and a product somewhere else. Impossible to regulate. And I've done travel agency laws in many parts of the world, and it's been an ongoing challenge. So what did the travel agency industry do to their great credit? They said, if you can't beat it, enjoy it. Let's deregulate. So from 1 July this year, travel agency is no longer licensed. The travel agency legislation has been repealed, the travel compensation fund has been shut down, and travel agency is now completely deregulated. And they're relying not on special legislation, draconian legislation, they're relying on the general Australian consumer law, they're relying on credit card chargeback facilities when someone does the wrong thing. There's all sorts of other innovations in the marketplace now which do the work of this very draconian regulatory system that's in place. And I think the same could be said, with all due respect to John, for the taxi industry and for hotels, for restaurants, and for traditional bed and breakfast operators. Every sector really needs to face up to the challenge that these new innovations are coming, and you can't stop them. If you can't beat it, you've got to join them. You've got to collectively get together in cooperation with the new entrants, if you like, and let's deconstruct this draconian, antiquated regulatory system.
It's not just regulations though that have people thinking and talking, it's also investment. So do you believe that people will stop investing in the traditional, more of the traditional players in the market and move their money into some of the newer players? I mean, Mike, have you seen any evidence of that?
Short answer is no, because I think there's room for everybody. There's people, in different age groups that are accustomed to staying at a hotel and having five-star service, and they'd never dream of doing B2B. They'd feel uncomfortable going in and sleeping in someone else's place. And then there are the younger generation that actually get excited by So the challenge for me is to replicate that. And that's where competition is so good. Because if I don't replicate that, we will become a dinosaur. And you know what happens to dinosaurs.
Julien, do you see investment being a problem, like people changing the way where they put their money?
So a deterrent, no. But yes, I do believe that investment does exist and will continue to exist in new ventures. It always has and it always will. And low overheads and large profits is always going to encourage further investment. That's just the way that the sort of social economic story goes. That's not to say, and I do have to agree, that's not to say that there isn't enough money to go around. Again, I refer to the fact that brands and established companies have that in their portfolio. And security comes as a great asset. So, you know, high risk, and there's a possible high return, but there's also a possible zero return. Whereas the conservative bet is always going to be placed towards companies that are established with names and brands, etc. So investment will flow on both sides, and I think that's the important thing to understand about this whole discussion, and that is that more is more. More investment across different companies, new companies, old companies, means more for the industry, and it means more profit for everyone involved in that industry.
Sam, you would know that for every Airbnb, there's multitudes of failures in that sector. Do you see investment as a problem for the traditional operators, or do you see more people going, I'm going to take a punt on this?
I certainly share the view that I think that there's opportunity in the market for everyone. I don't believe that, I think, as Mike said, I think that we've got people that will continue to look for different experiences, and I think people talk about like the size of the pie and what has the sharing economy done, and it's really grown the overall pie. It hasn't taken a slice out of it. And it sort of reminds me of the conversations early on in Australia around eBay and online shopping, and people were concerned that eBay was going to detract from the overall market, how much people were spending, and it was going to take a slice of the existing market, when in fact it was just overall growing the overall size of the pie. So, look, I think there will continue to be opportunities for everyone, and investment, I think, will continue to flow where it should, providing that everyone involved continues to innovate and has a product that's in demand.
John, what's your view on this? Do you see the traditional businesses still continuing to get the investment that they need?
There'll be a quite a shift, and I'm seeing that in the taxi industry now. People are nervous. Drivers, we've actually got taxi drivers who are operating their own small business and moving to Uber. And it's not because of the money, because they make less money, as we understand. But they don't get harassed by transport department now. That's a pretty low level, or say in the case of some taxi drivers, Jerry, it's probably a high concern that people, drivers who want to go back to their job. Once again, I keep coming back to this level playing field is the real issue for us. Don't mind the competition. Our brand will get us through a certain degree, but there will be people who will be less reluctant to invest in the taxi industry whilst you have this uncertainty around it. And it's just so vital that government needs to act quickly. Mike's talking about an incubation period, as I said. An incubation period of how long? 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, whilst that could be absolutely horrendous to some people's personal investment strategies.
Just for jumping to that, I would have thought that would be a really good example to suggest that less legislation is needed within your industry as opposed to more. If people are jumping ship to go to work for companies where there is less legislation, then surely if there was less legislation around your company itself, then they may stay where they are and want to be a little bit happier.
I don't think it's the legislation, I think it's the harassment. They can see that on one side no one's being harassed at all. They've been issued cease and desist, but they don't do what they like. So here there's a structure. Transport police can identify a cab first sight, but you can't identify an Uber driver sitting in an unmarked sedan with no brand, there's just no identifying features at all. Apart from the fact they've got an icon sitting right inside of the dash, and they're sitting parking anywhere they like. And it's just the uneven playing field that's really causing me concern for the taxi industry. I mean, if that was sorted out, investment would come back. I mean,
actually, this bigger shift that we call the sharing economy, the collaborative economy, it really represents a shift away from centralised institutions at its highest level towards these decentralised, democratised marketplaces that are connecting people at an individual level. And I think we have to remember that that's what's on the horizon. It's less about which companies and which industries will succeed or fail in this framework. It's the fact that we're moving to a more decentralised, democratised, networked society. And whether or not a car is identifiable, in San Francisco, the Lyft, which is a competitor product to UberX, they're driving around pink fluffy moustaches on the fronts of their cars. They're extremely identifiable. I don't think it's not necessarily a disclosure problem. It's the fact that people are looking for less complexity, less regulation, less less stuff to sort out. They're in fact looking for more direct connection. And it's linked to changes that are also happening that we consider to be part of the sharing economy. Things like crowdfunding, things like peer-to-peer lending, where people are circumventing banks and actually borrowing and lending money directly to and from each other. These are all exactly the same situation in different industries that are maybe part of this broader conversation considering today about tourism specifically, but we're looking to get rid of the middlemen, have more distributed wealth opportunities as well, rather than the people at the top being the ones who are accumulating the wealth and the trickle down being around salaries or time spent. Whereas in fact now, Airbnb is actually a wealth creator for hundreds of thousands of people around the world, as are a lot of these other platforms, because everyone's benefiting along the chain, not just the owners of the company and those who invested in it. So it's a completely different structure.
Trevor, is investment changing?
Sorry?
Is investment changing?
No, I think it is, yes. I think changes in consumer preferences and new business models have certainly redirected investment ever since Adam Smith. It's the way the economy works. That's efficient, it's good, we should promote it. That makes the economy, makes suppliers respond to what the consumer wants. That's how we all have the standard of living we have today. If I can just give you one statistic. In my other part-time job, I'm a director of an organisation called the Holiday Rental Industry Association. And our research has shown that there are something like 500,000 second homes or holiday, 500,000 Australian families own a holiday home or second home. Of those 500,000 homes, about 250,000 are rented out when they're not in use by their owners. Of that 250,000, my guess would be probably 60,000 or 70,000 at max are presently listed on platforms like Stays, HomeAway, Flipkey and Airbnb. So there's a tremendous unused capacity there, if you like, to accommodate people short term. Now you could just leave that locked up and think about what's the economic cost of that, and what's the opportunity cost of that. Or you can utilise that, and we can just tremendously grow this whole industry for the benefit of the airlines and the restaurants and the tour guides and all the other people who depend upon it. And I'll give you one anecdote. Of course, second homes and holiday homes in the south of France are a very fashionable thing to have. But in some parts of the south of France, where the British expats own the second home and leave it locked up all year, the owners, the butchers, the bakers, the candlestick makers in these small villages are so incensed. There have been instances where they've burnt these houses down. They would much rather have them rented out to have people come into their community and spend money in the shops